Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and today on the Roundup, we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators this past week. And before we get to those, I do want to give a special shout out to those that are listening on our podcast, making us a regular part of your listening this week. And also those that are watching live on Facebook. Obviously, you are the core of our audience, and we're really happy to have your participation today and engaging with us in answering these important questions. To those that are watching on repeat, either on our Facebook channel or on YouTube, we appreciate you being a part of our wish to disseminate some of the knowledge we've learned over the last week or so in terms of the kinds of issues that are involved and you're grappling with on the campus level. We're hoping to shed some light from a little bit broader perspective as to how you might be leveraging these various topics as you address your own campus's response to international education and international admissions recruitment especially. So we'll get to these questions in just a minute. And for those that aren't familiar with how the Roundup works here on Wednesday afternoons, 1 p.m. Eastern, we take 3 complex questions we hear throughout news stories we're reading, developing some themes that we see each week. And then we put these out in our newsletter, the news articles that we base this Roundup on. We put those news articles out in a newsletter format on Monday mornings called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. And if you're wondering what SMIE stands for, that's Social Media and International Ed News. So we have usually 4 to 6 social media stories, and then anywhere from 20 to 30 international ed stories that we cover and highlight and provide kind of our quick takes, hot takes on some of these news stories that we're seeing. And then we go into more depth here on the Roundup to give our perspectives and a little bit more input for you that helps you get a sense on whether or not these issues can have some value add to your campuses and how you approach them if you make certain changes. Now, we're going to start today with a question that is and always is a part of any international admissions office's self-examination is, what are the essential elements in international student communications these days? And we're looking at this from a broader perspective. Obviously, students need to learn X, Y, and Z about your campus to find out if you're going to be on their lists, and how you get that message across, where you get it across. All of these are important elements in that. And we're going to discuss those a little bit. And where we'll start with is a conversation I had with the folks at Unibuddy. They are kind of one of the up-and-coming ed tech firms that focus on connecting on peer conversations between your students on your campus and prospective students, and their ability to connect online and ask the kind of questions directly, get the answers that they're looking for to what your campus might have to offer them. So the folks at Unibuddy, they put together a roadshow series of events a couple weeks ago, and I was featured on one of their programs where the theme was best practices in communicating with international students. So I'm dropping the link to that chat. It's got a YouTube video that hopefully will be helpful to you in terms of seeing these kind of core elements that we're talking about in terms of the essential elements. But in it, we talked about in conversations with those who are participating in the chat, as well as the co-hosts from Unibuddy, getting a look at what really matters most, if you had to boil it down to the essential elements. First up is having a presence where your audience lives, and we call that live where your audience lives. And this is really the heart and soul of any successful strategy. Is you can have the best content in the world, you can have the best delivery mechanisms, but unless you're on the platforms where your audience spends their time in the markets that you're looking to target, you've really missed opportunities. It's wasted effort, in fact. So, and certainly having a lot less impact. So that has always been, back to my days with Education USA, when we were first exploring social media and setting up their global channels, our focus was okay, we're responsible for global channels for Education USA. Our individual advising centers in different markets, they needed to be able to use the social media channels that were right and appropriate for students in their markets. So that was very different in China as it was going to be for students in Brazil at that time in the late noughties. So all of that is to say you need to have you need to first have the intelligence data and on the ground intelligence to know where those what are the top social media channels that you need to be on if you're focusing in particular markets. And that's always connecting those dots it can be a challenge, but we've talked through on the Roundup before, and certainly in posts that we put out through the newsletter about the importance of data sources like We Are Social and Hootsuite. They have a combined project that they call the Global Web Index, that using the Global Web Index, that catalogs changes year on year, quarter on quarter in digital, social, and mobile trends in usage. And that's just a phenomenal source, treasure trove of information. And that will help you get a better sense of, okay, for our target age group, if you're looking at undergraduates, you're looking at that 15 to 18-year-old group, where are they spending their time? What platforms are they using? Are they on mobile devices more in one country than they are in another? Does that impact your delivery mechanisms? Now, having all that data at hand to help inform your decision about where your audience lives will help you decide when you do get your message together and you're focused on timing and all of the other things. That will allow you the flexibility to maximize the impact of your messaging. So that was certainly the approach that we took with EdUSA, and I've done in every consult I've had with university and college clients and advising offices overseas, and when I share with them how important it is to have, you can have the best messaging, but unless you're saying that message on the platforms that your audiences are on at the times that they're on them, which is another important subpart of that, you're missing an opportunity. The second piece of that strategy is always essential elements, is having a very robust listen component built into your to what you do. Listen not only for what your audience is saying and how the questions that they ask on your social media platforms when you've posted something, or when they come to your page and they ask a question or make a comment. What if you're seeing trends in what questions are being asked, how they're being asked, what the tone of comments that they're making are like, that informs you and how it may impact your overall messaging in the future. But it's also how your brand, your institution is being talked about in the wider world, particularly in the countries that you're targeting. How do you have those mechanisms set up to listen and to really respond based on what your audience is asking for, and knowing that is an important piece. And the final, what I consider the most essential element of international student communications is keeping them coming back for more. And what that alludes to is really, yes, it's good to have live events every once in a while, good to have regular content that keeps them interested, and that's really the engagement piece that you're looking to maintain, increasing the number of touch points you have with a student throughout their experience and their interest in your institution from initial prospect through to enrolled. What are the various major indicators in that life cycle? What are you doing to re-engage them, to keep them coming back to your platforms, to your website, wherever it may be that you're having events and hosting content? So that for us is something that can never be underestimated. Is if you're on the right platforms, if you're making every attempt to tailor your message to your audience's needs, and then providing opportunities to re-engage, you're setting yourself up for success. Because if you're doing that and you're doing it well, then there is no reason that you can't pull those students through the funnel in a very effective and efficient way and improve your overall yield in the end. So that's the overall goal, is to enroll a better class and with less effort, perhaps. But certainly taking those steps to make your communications have the impact you want it to have. If you're taking those initial 3 steps, you're certainly doing the right things in terms of getting your communication strategy right. Now, strategies, the content of your strategies should be fairly consistent, and you do annual reviews and make changes as necessary to your markets. But your strategies, in terms of how you approach it from the big picture, should remain fairly consistent. What often does change is the content of your messaging, and what you potentially highlight one year to the next will be very different. So obviously, this year has been a year of complete change. To how we do what we do, where we do what we do, and at what time we do what we do. In terms of what we're looking at now on this next part of this question on essential elements is messaging, and what is the content that you're focusing on this year. The folks at Intl, I often refer to their data that they gather and their kind of broad strokes that they paint for international educators and international recruiters. And they've taken a recent look, and they're doing a series on what your students need now, and they're in part 2 right now. And there's some interesting data here on content, and I think in terms of the data that they're gathering, in terms of the listening that they've been doing, and through the resources that they have available to them, in understanding what the most important factors are for current 12th graders who are coming for undergrad admissions in the next year. The marked shift in importance in certain factors is pretty dramatic, and so the ones that have seen the largest jump are cost of education, had gone from about 59% to almost 80%. In terms of the top 4 factors, it is the single most important factor. It was the most important factor before, but it is even more so now. You look at location, that has become even more important, from just under 50% to 74%. You see majors has in third place has grown from 50%, which used to be the second most important, now is the third most important factor, went from 50% to 67% or 68%. And financial aid, related to cost, but not exactly the same, went from just under 40% to just under 60% in terms of the top 4 factors. So there's increased kind of hyper focus in terms of issues that are considered the most important factors that current 12th graders are using in their college choices. So I think that's important to keep an eye on as you make your own decisions on your campuses as to what you need to focus on in your messaging to prospective students, particularly around costs and financial aid, because folks aren't surviving this pandemic. Very few are actually thriving through this, particularly families that might have been previously strong targets for you and your institution. You're now seeing some of that interest in certain countries certainly drop off. There's parts of this world that are still in the midst of the pandemic and are coming to grips with getting it under control. Europe certainly has done a much better job than we have here in the States, and Latin America is still grappling with it now, and is apparently a quarter of all cases and deaths are in Latin America at this point. So there's real regional differences in terms of how the pandemic has impacted our future audiences. And it's important to keep a finger on the pulse and know the issues that are happening on the ground. So this data that Intl has collected is Naviance data that is primarily looking at domestic U.S. students. But you can imagine that in some countries that might be on your radar, the location issue is not is a country issue, perhaps first. So when we've seen and had some other surveys that have reflected kind of a growing interest for students to stay closer to home. So does that mean that South American families are going to be more willing to look at the U.S. market as opposed to sending them to Europe or to East Asia? Perhaps. Or Australia and New Zealand for their education. That may be the case in terms of whether they feel that proximity is close enough or not. Or are they going to be looking more at in-country options. There are a lot of differences that and will require on-the-ground knowledge that you perhaps don't have at your fingertips, but certainly I would recommend for that truly in-country knowledge, if you don't have agents or anyone on the ground that represents your university or partner institutions in certain countries that you're targeting for undergrad recruitment, look at, consider reaching out to your Education USA advising friends, attending the EdUSA forum virtually in October. I know I'm looking forward to doing that. It's going to be a free event for U.S. higher ed professionals, so that would be, I think, an absolute must-do in October. Since you're not going to be traveling, you can do this from the comfort of your home. You can attend the sessions that you need, and I think that's going to be really insightful or an important opportunity to get the insightful data and on-the-ground kind of anecdotal knowledge you need about your key markets so that you can affect your messaging accordingly. Another piece today is kind of a more general frame that's from a British perspective, but it has essential elements that I talk about all the time in terms of engaging with student recruits in a post-COVID world. That's the title of the article, Financial Education news.co.uk, fenews.co.uk, and it focuses on identifying who your key audiences are, and then talks about the value of online peer reviews as much as personal recommendations, and the value of those, the student voices that you use in particularly your messaging, video, particular online content that you have that's either student blogs, international student videos, them participating in live chats, whatever it is. Those need to be essential elements for something like Unibuddy or other services, the Access platform that have those kind of peer connections that will connect current and future students together for conversations. So that first piece about who are your key audiences and where are they is absolutely essential. What are your key messages? The Intl folks talk a little bit about the changing nature of some of the messaging that you might want to highlight. The unique selling points are this is what it really boils down to. What are the values that you're trying to get across? The courses of study that might be different, the facilities, accommodations that might be unique, particularly in maybe single person housing, sports, accessibility, funding is going to be key. The clubs and organizations you have on campus, international study abroad, study away opportunities. So all of these are important elements there, and certainly well worth keeping your finger on what students are going to be looking for on that front. And then the question of where will you find and reach your potential students in terms of their online presence, what platforms they're on. We've talked about that here, live where your audiences live. Knowing and then also empowering your campus to be involved in getting these core messages out across their platforms, because while universities all have kind of campus-wide YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever feed you have, maybe even TikTok, but we'll talk more about that next week in terms of what the future of TikTok in the U.S. is with the looming ban, and whether the Oracle's sanctioned purchase of TikTok will prevent that ban for that platform being impacted by the current administration's policies. We don't know yet anything on WeChat end, but in terms of buyouts, but we'll certainly see what transpires here. But involving more of your campus in the process of connecting with future students and connecting the messaging across that you're trying to get across from the entire institution, because students, as an international admissions office, you may have messaging that you're sending out, particularly on social platforms that is very specific to your job. But international students also want to get future international students want to get a flavor of what's going on campus. So I think it's really important to make sure we're in touch with what's going on that front as well. Now, what's next up on the next question is how are universities successfully enrolling international students now? This is one of the most difficult fall intakes that this country has ever seen. The most difficult, I'll put it out there, it is the most difficult fall intake this country's ever seen. We are, in terms of the global impact it's had, we are dealing with institutions that made decisions for their campuses back in May, June for this fall. Many were hedging their bets and saying one thing publicly, that they're going to be fully in person, but having backup plans, at least saying that they would have backup plans in place, A, B, and C, or B, C, and D. But few campuses have had the flexibility and nimbleness of movement, which is rare for many institutions, to come up with alternatives that make sense and are actually accessible and usable by their admitted class. We talked back in the spring, late spring, early summer, about students or institutions that made the decision early to go online and to offer deferment or to January or fully online for the first year. And we've just seen the Cal State schools decide to go fully online in the spring as well. What those implications are in terms of the messaging out, it certainly becomes clear to your students early on, and shows that your decisiveness is there, and you have a clear plan. We've seen how that has worked. We've talked last week about the 8 institutions that partnered with SMIE to have cohorts of their students start their studies, and this is primarily in South Korea and China, through SMIE locations where they had large cohorts begin their education at remote sites. These are either partner institutions or SMIE offices where they begin their classes as a group and then will eventually come to campus when things are better, whether in the spring or next fall or summer. So another example of an institution that has been making some very significant moves in the online front for their students is the University of Arizona. They've launched their Global Arizona campus, our University of Arizona Global, and that has involved the purchase of Ashford University, an online provider, that online institution, to add that technological backbone and location background to their offerings online. They have also expanded their access overseas and other parts of the United States to 490 WeWork locations in the U.S. and in 37 countries. So that is, WeWork has been one of the hottest growing trends in kind of shared work environments around the country and indeed the world over the last couple of years. And with the pandemic, you've seen a lot more of these locations popping up where remote work can be done, and access to those is being provided by significant employers, but also for University of Arizona, they're including allowing their current and new students to begin their education at these WeWork locations, as well as their other partners that they have, international partners. So I think that's an important step in terms of their enrollment. We shared some of their numbers last week in terms of their total student body. In the newsletter, we highlighted the article on this front that shared where their students were, international students were enrolling from, and how many are online. There are a lot of other colleges this fall that are reporting their international numbers. University of Illinois is one of those that has a large portion of their incoming class is from China. And they have cohorts that are their cohort from China is actually, I think, was up quite a significant number. But they're beginning their classes. I think they were up 3 or 21%, their Chinese class, but they're starting online. So it's interesting to see where that goes. The Arizona example is certainly one, but you also have those other, and the SMIE example we mentioned last week, and again today. But you also look at organizations that already had campuses overseas. NYU has campuses in Abu Dhabi and Shanghai. They have launched their Go Local program in mid-July, so almost a couple months ago now. That their Shanghai campus will now host some 2,300 Chinese undergraduates and 800 graduate students who are unable or prefer not to travel to either the NYC or the Abu Dhabi campus. So these students will be taught in person at both the NYU Shanghai campus and in WeWork spaces converted into classrooms. Interesting. They're also tapping into that network. So that is important, an important distinction there. It certainly helps with the access issues that, as does the Arizona Go WeWork program. You look at what these campuses are doing; they're really taking advantage of and being quick enough to move to make these changes that really wouldn't be in a normal year would be unthinkable for institutions to make that. You also see besides NYU, you see Penn State, Cornell, Duke, Syracuse, and Pittsburgh have developed plans with Chinese partner institutions to have their new freshmen from China start their studies in China at the partner institution and then transfer in the spring. So that is Penn State for example, has a 17-week academic program in Shanghai for freshman students. There's a significant need for that because obviously we've talked in the past about how dependent U.S. institutions are on their Chinese students, particularly at the undergraduate level. And that's something that is probably not sustainable in an ideal situation long term, but the access to equal educational content and quality is an important tool. This is obviously a temporary fix until travel and health situations improve to the point where students can make the jump to the U.S. campus. But we look at the interest of these institutions and obviously protecting the bottom line by allowing and creating opportunities for these students to still enroll is vital for their success long term. So we'll be keeping eyes on this, and I'll be looking for more examples of how this is working on different college campuses and what those different versions of these kind of pods of students in concentrations, particularly in China, Korea, other major source countries, that allow them to begin their education this fall in not just online, which most institutions are counting their online internationals that will eventually, hopefully, enroll on campus in the spring or fall next year. They are counting them that way, but some are just doing it all online, and it may be asynchronous, and they may have to get up early and do it live or late, depending on where they are in the world. But there are a lot of different variations in this fall that we're seeing. So we'll certainly keep you up to date on where the successes are. Obviously, too early to tell on whether these are actually going to be great fixes and allow those students that are enrolled there remotely in the fall to come in the spring in person. But certainly a lot of nimbleness of thought and quickness in action and to make these kind of changes and implement them on such a quick basis in university terms. Final topic of the day, we're gonna talk a little bit about standardized testing and whether standardized testing is no longer relevant. And for those who've watched many of these broadcasts before, my take on standardized testing, particularly for international students, when I talk about it, standardized testing, that covers a very broad spectrum of things. You've got the academic ability standardized test, ACT, SAT. You've got the English proficiency test, TOEFL, IELTS, Duolingo, PTE, academic, ITEP, all of these. And then you've got standardized exams, the AP exams, the IB exams, A-levels, other national curriculum that are offered in a standardized fashion. Those with the end of with exams, those are standardized tests too, but they have their own place. And certainly, I'm not saying all standardized testing is irrelevant, but certainly for international students applying to the United States, the SAT and ACT is where I say very significantly that those are not relevant to it should not be relevant for admissions purposes because of the nature of those tests. So I was interviewed for an article for NAFSA's International Educator. Originally thought it was coming out in September, but it actually came out in August, so I missed it and didn't post it then. But I posted the link to that, and again, all the links to these stories I'm dropping into the comments section on the Facebook page. But if you've gotten the newsletter on Monday, you've already gotten all of these links. So subscribe to the newsletter if you haven't already, and you'll certainly have all these links already. But this International Educator article called The Stress Test, it takes a look at institutions' approaches to testing and how really a flexible approach to testing is the best way to go moving forward, particularly in a global pandemic environment where tests have been canceled for the whole academic year in certain countries. We just saw that happen in Egypt for SAT. There hasn't been an international SAT offered since March that actually went off. ACT, similar challenges. My focus on this question again is what's actually working. Why is it not working with certain countries or certain institutions? And we've seen obviously a lion's share of four-year institutions have already made that switch. Two-year schools, for the most part, unless you were private, two-year college were already test optional, and many of those that were still required have gone test optional since, or test blind even. Many of the prominent four-year schools, all the top 50, other than the academies, service academies, had gone test optional. We're now seeing, I think the Naval Academy is the first to go test flexible for next year. We'll have more on that next week in our newsletter. But Citadel, a military school in South Carolina, has gone test optional, except for, and they have a number of different exemptions, which are homeschool students, South Carolina students. The state requires an SAT or ACT test score to be considered for state-awarded scholarships. So that's one bit of a challenge. But the international students for whom this is their exemption there. International students for whom English is not their native language must still submit the results of the TOEFL or the SAT, ACT. So certainly I'm not saying English proficiency. Last thing I'm saying is English proficiency tests should be test optional or should be irrelevant. They certainly are the backbone of how a student is admitted and issued immigration documents these days in terms of English proficiency. You need some sort of baseline to determine that, and there are significant standardized tests that have that background that can provide that information. But certainly for our purposes here, this exemption is saying, well, if you're an international student and English isn't your native language, you do need a TOEFL. They don't have any other options there like IELTS or anything else, or the SAT, ACT that may not yet be available overseas. So I'm kind of giving them a little pass because I do say the TOEFL will substitute, but obviously it's not substituting for all the things that the SAT and ACT measure. So it's just English. So we'll keep eyes on how other schools make that transition, but certainly a lot to digest this week, as there is most week. But certainly happy to hear your feedback on these topics and more, and looking forward to continuing the conversation. Have a great day.